if you want to check with them and see if they're interested.
City's incommunicated at 2100G. What happens at 2100G?
ABC Notebook, Making the News.
Television news is the way most of us learn about what's happening in our world, and not very many people know how it really works. What goes on behind the scenes? Who decides what you see on the air? What's the latest in technical wizardry? We'll try to answer these and many more of your questions as we take a look at how the news is made. I'm Peter Jennings, and this is ABC Notebook, Making the News. In preparing this broadcast, ABC Research conducted a nationwide survey of young people to find out how they perceive television news. Our survey found that nearly 70% consider television news their most important source of information. And with that in mind, we invited a group of young people to join me and three colleagues. ABC News President Roone Arledge, he's our boss, Vice President and Executive Producer Av Weston, and Correspondent Lynn Scher to ask questions about television news. And in responding, we went behind the scenes at our ABC News bureaus to illustrate the process of news production.
How do you position your reporters to cover world news?
We have a 24-hour-a-day operation we call the assignment desk, and those are people who are based in not only New York but Washington, all around the world, and it is their job to read the wires, to read the cables that our correspondents send in all the time, to answer the telephones, and just have a very good news sense. What they do is, after they get that information, is they begin to move correspondents and crews to be in position either for stories that are breaking right now or in anticipation of stories. One of the inputs to that assignment desk is what the evening news or World News Tonight, the broadcasts, want and need. And so part of what I did was to move Peter Jennings to the northern part of India to be in position before the Indians and the Bangladeshis went to war. Some of the pieces that he did were a perfect example of an assignment desk moving correspondence based on journalism and a good guess.
People here tend to remember the war with Pakistan in 1965. A day before it, everybody was saying war would not occur. This is Peter Jennings, ABC News in Calcutta.
We have a lot of our reporters who are here in New York or in Washington, but we have bureaus all around the world, and we change them a lot depending on what the nature of the news is. So that if tomorrow there was a riot in South Africa, we have a bureau there, which is not as large as it used to be, but is manned so that we can get people right to the scene quickly.
Every weekday morning, ABC News bureaus around the world are linked via a conference telephone call with ABC News here in New York. This is where the news executives and the producers are told of what is happening in various other parts of the world, what stories are breaking.
Los Angeles. Good morning. There were 20 arrests this morning of anti-apartheid protesters at UCLA. KBC has stringer material which we'll take a look at.
And a preliminary list, or a lineup as we call it, is developed for the nightly broadcast. As the day progresses, that list can very well change as world events dictate. Next question. Who? Rajesh?
If something happens at 4 o'clock and you have to write it out and you have to have the film processed, how are you able to do this? Could you give us a step-by-step process?
Okay. Well, something happens at 4 o'clock really means you're happening before 2 hours and a half before the broadcast. Then it depends very much where it's happening in the world. But you did use one phrase that is no longer important to us, because we no longer use film in television. So we don't have to go to some strange city in the world and find a film processing lab any longer, because we now have videotape, which is instant, and we can now satellite from almost anywhere in the world at very short notice.
As all of the world by now must know, there is a new Princess of Wales. Diana Spencer and Charles Philip Arthur George have been married.
The Soviet and the American delegations have spent the day before the summit telling anyone who will listen that they are here in good faith.
It all seems inevitable that these tenacious revolutionaries who first defeated the French would eventually defeat the United States.
With satellites today, live coverage from anywhere in the world is almost commonplace. Television signals are beamed up to one of the many satellites orbiting 22,000 miles above the Earth. The signal is then relayed down to a satellite receiving dish on Earth, where it is processed, recorded on videotape, edited, and put on the air.
Go forward. The shot change should be the output.
It takes a television signal less than half a second to travel the 47,000 miles from London up to the satellite and down to New York. Okay, let's say a story breaks at 4 o'clock. Would you like to pick the place and we'll work it through?
Mexico.
Mexico, okay. And Lynn, you're the reporter on the scene in Mexico, and there has been this enormous industrial explosion which we had recently in Mexico. And it happened at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What's the first thing you're going to do?
I'm going to get a real quick understanding of what happened. Calling the office means I get the executive producer of World News Tonight. He'll be on one end, and I'm going to say, here's what just happened. What do you want me to do about it?
If this occurred in Mexico, and Lynn is covering the editorial side, the next thing is to find, does anybody have any pictures or any survivors or any interviews or anything that already exists? And now it becomes a job of coordinating, of getting Lynn in touch with those resources so that she can work them together into a report which can then be satellited back to us in New York.
So I have looked and seen this enormous explosion. I've convinced them. Again, I'll call in and I will say to the executive producer, deserves 2.5 minutes. And the executive producer will say to me,
how about 1.5 minutes? We may say 2.5. It really depends. A major event, and we're all talking about the same event, which is the Mexico City petrochemical blast. The magnitude of it, the damage, the number of people who were injured or killed, the economic implications and the political implications was so great that 2.5 minutes was probably what we would have done. The real question is, for heaven's sake, will you get it in on time, or do I have to start changing the content of the broadcast? Because we have a lineup, and it lists the stories, what the running order is to be, and how long they're to run. If everything goes marvelously correct throughout the day, why, that lineup, we make it noon, can stand until 6:30 at night. But here comes Lynn Sure with her Mexico City fire. That's out the window, and worse possibly is that she's not ready to go at 6:30. Well, standing in the control room, we're talking into Peter's ear saying, Peter, make it look professional. You can do it. Stay cool. It'll be along at any moment. What we start to do is we start to slip it. So what we're doing, and we're talking into that little thing in Peter's ear from the control room saying, the Mexico City piece isn't ready. Go to story number 2.
But you know what we're doing. We're in severe overload here. We're going to delete Shell from the second segment. We'll talk you through this. We're going to move Betsy Aaron up into the 4th segment, and we're going to put baseball back in after the last commercial. He's going to give President Anchorman at the same time has got to be preparing himself to know as much about the story at a distance as Lynn does on the scene. Because at 6:29:30, we go on the air at 6:30. At 6:29 and 30 seconds, something may happen to the satellite between here and Mexico City, and I will have to ad-lib the entire story.
Make sure you know it's 14 and 6. It's 14 and then 6, the aheads.
20 seconds there. 1 over 2 on the top, okay. I think that's a 5, that at a token.
156.
15 there.
No, we're not.
No, we're not. We're not switching segments.
McWethy's 127. Trout's 121, so we're all within shooting time.
On the line. Here we go, folks.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Headed. From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. It was 5:42 in the morning outside Mexico City. One witness said it was like the sun had come out early. First, there was one explosion at the natural gas plant, then another, and another. Before it was over, more than 200 people were dead and more than 500 injured. Since our young viewers came to see us, a powerful earthquake has struck Mexico City. Thousands of people were killed, and the story was of such importance that our evening broadcast originated entirely from Mexico City. And our coverage followed the same procedure we showed you earlier. Everyone worked together to get the story quickly and accurately.
A global generation that danced and sang to the music of John Lennon mourned his death today.
Marvin Gaye, whose smooth voice and sensual singing style made him one of the most popular soul artists of the past 2 decades, was killed in Los Angeles today.
Although he was only 33 years old, John Belushi had already established himself as a major American comic actor.
Let's say somebody dies at 4:30.
and your news is on 6:30. How do you get together all the stuff about this person's life in 2 hours?
I will give you the best example of exactly that, which was when Princess Grace died. I don't remember exactly what time, but I think it was suspiciously close to 4:30. I remember it was quite late in the day. We set in motion a very, very capable team of people to start doing things like calling up people that have rights to motion pictures and getting copies of the films that she was in. The next thing we did was somebody punched into a computer Princess Grace's name so that we could see what our own ABC videotape or film library had on that person. In other words, there were times she had made appearances that ABC News had covered, and we save all that. And certainly within an hour we had pretty much of what we wanted, and I wrote it, and somebody cut it, and we got it on the air in time.
ABC's Lynn Sherr now looks back at Princess Grace, who, of course, millions of Americans knew as Grace Kelly.
Her life as a Hollywood movie queen was a fairy tale by itself. The cool, beautiful blonde, regal on screen, courted and loved by everyone's motion picture idols. But off-screen, she created an even greater fantasy, capping a schoolgirl's dream and a whirlwind romance by marrying the prince and going off to live in a castle. Recently, she told one interviewer that her life was not really a fairy tale, that she was, like all contemporary women, trying to cope.
I'd like to be remembered as a decent human being and a caring one.
Lynn Sherr, ABC News, New York.
How much of your own opinion are you allowed to put into the broadcast?
That's a good question. You try not to let your own opinions get in the broadcast, but that doesn't mean to say that we all don't have opinions. You take a look at four people, we're as different as you are all different from one another. I think that most reporters train themselves over the years to leave their opinions at the typewriter. It's a great system of checks and balances in television. The executive producer, in the case of watches reporters very carefully, all of us, to make sure that our own opinions don't get on the screen, right?
Well, I think also we have learned that because we have access to people's minds in their homes, that's where you watch television every night, what we say and what we report has to be done with great responsibility. And so we set up a series of editorial checks. The correspondent on the scene, of course, is a trained journalist. The producer is a trained journalist. Their effort is looked at when it comes back to New York by producers and editors who are trained journalists. So there is a system in which we can check to be sure that the biases we may have, and we all have biases, are filtered out.
Next question.
Have you ever been involved in a national story that now looking back on you feel was a mistake to have reported?
My gut reaction is certainly not. I don't think there's anything I've covered that I would say to you, oh my God, we never should have covered that. I think we have our excesses, and I think we sometimes underreport things that in retrospect are more important or have become more important.
Let me just add one thing to what Lynn said before, that the the most difficult decisions that we ever have to make when you say, you know, what have we ever done that we regret, is every once in a while a story comes along that calls into question the security of the country. And we are all citizens and patriots just like you are and just like everybody else. And we love the country, and we also love the freedom of the press that this country grants to all of us. And with that goes not only a responsibility, but it goes this terrible dilemma that you occasionally have when you have a story that you know is correct, or you've done everything that you can possibly do to assure that it's correct. And some high official, sometimes the President of the United States, but a lot of times one of his representatives will call you and tell you that if you go with that story, you're going to endanger lives of people, or you're going to endanger the security of the country, and that it's unpatriotic for you to do that.
But there has been a national debate about censorship on Grenada, and the coverage of the invasion has led to the most bitter argument between the media and the White House in many years.
While it may not seem credible to some of you, it was indeed the concern that we had for the safety of newsmen and media, television, as well as radio and print media.
And at that time, you have to make this awful decision between the government's power to call something secret, which is merely embarrassing to them, and the people's right to know what their government is doing, and on the other hand, the very necessary secrecy that certain government activities should enjoy. And none of us want to be involved in costing lives or endangering the security of the country, and so those are the ones that are invariably the most difficult. Those are the ones that we go right down to 2 minutes before broadcast, before deciding whether to go with the story or not.
Does showing scenes of violence help convey your message to the people?
As the producer?
There is no question that there are certain events in which the violence is very much part of the story. The aftermath of a bomb going off in a Beirut suburb and seeing what happens when that bomb exploded can only be told in one way, and that is you have to show it.
Well, there is something that every Lebanese man and woman fears more than any shelling. It is the car bomb. And yet another one exploded this morning in a working-class district of West Beirut. Just one picture will tell you how wretched man can be to his fellow man. There was this wounded girl, and there were at least 14 people killed, more than 80 others wounded. It is this kind of random but pointed violence which keeps Lebanon in turmoil.
On the other hand, if you don't show those pictures in some context, if you don't make sense out of why you're showing those pictures, then that is a mistake. And I think we've become far more sensitive. Television is a very young business, and we are learning almost every day. And what we did back in the 60s was a lesson we carried forward to the 70s, and what we learned during the Vietnam War is something we've carried forward to Beirut and just in terms of war. Again, I go back to what I said earlier. There are times when violence has to be shown in order to make the point of the story.
Gosh, a lot of questions there.
Where do the ideas for non-headline stories come from?
Everybody who's working on or for the broadcast has some ideas. We will do a story on pick a subject, which may not be for today, but maybe for 6 weeks from now. And we'll work 6 weeks ahead and even longer. So that process is going on all the time, and everybody has some kind of input into it.
Most of us like, from time to time, to be able to step back and say, I don't want to go cover a fire, I don't want to go cover an explosion. Let me go work for a week or so on a nice little feature. We call those feature pieces. And it is a great change of rhythm to go from rushing around and covering breaking news to being able to step back and go cover something that has nothing to do with anything that you've been doing.
Do you change the stories if you think that kids are going to be viewing them at 6:30 around dinner time, or if adults will be viewing them?
I used to use 3 criteria for determining what we would put on the evening news. The first one was, is my world safe? Literally. Does this story affect the world? And then, is my country safe? I mean, how does that affect me here at home, my nation, my city, my hometown? The final criteria we used was, okay, with all of that, then what's happened in the last 24 hours that made my life better in some ways?
If you were listening to the radio this morning at 10:50 Eastern Time, you probably heard the famine relief song, We Are the World.
There comes a time when we heed a certain call, when the world must come together as one. There are people dying.
Lou Check in Chicago is It was one of those special moments when much of the world did indeed come together as one. Hundreds gathered on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York to sing along. And it wasn't just the USA for Africa. The music was also played simultaneously in at least 25 other countries, as well as on the Voice of America. One of the verses from the song heard around the world on this Good Friday says, "Let us realize that a change can only come when we stand together as one." In many places all over the globe, that happened today. Gary Shepard, ABC News, Los Angeles.
We hope that you found this brief behind-the-scenes look at television news interesting and informative. Those of us who cover the news think it is. Thank you for joining us. I'm Peter Jennings. That's our report on news tonight. I'm Peter Jennings for everyone at ABC News. Good night.
Good evening.
Okay, we'll go to the first page. You've got the second page, right?
From ABC, this has been World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Classic soundbite.
Okay.
Live at the top, please. Live at the top. All right, go forward. There's no other wild line? That's it.
Thank you, 58.9. If you'll play that back for us on 58, we're going to set a box over this video.
Oh, Washington.
Yeah.
White.
This is John McCarthy in Washington.
Peter does page 12. Change.
Okay.
Eastern Bloc. 1979, the Carter administration exchanged 2 Russian spies for 5 Soviet dissidents.